It's Tony from CassetteComeback.com, and today I ain't going to be unwrapping any cassettes because I've done a video now which is something that a few of you have asked for. Now bear in mind, I'm no graphic designer, I'm just some old bloke, so don't expect whiz bang here. And those of you that are already well versed in cassettes and making good recordings, don't bother watching the rest of it. There's nothing in here that you don't already know. But for those of you that are returning to cassettes and you're not entirely sure of what it is that makes a good recording, this is a video that you've asked for, so I've made it. So here we have a picture of a pretty standard two-head deck. So what are the main features? Well, firstly we have these guys, the take-up reels. Now, the take-up reels, don't think that they move the tape. They don't really. They do when you fast forward and rewind, but when you're playing and recording, these guys do not issue the movement of the tape. We'll come to that. The first head you've got is an erase head, and in most mechanisms this is an electromagnet. In some of the cheaper mechanisms like Tanishan ones, it's not. It's just a regular magnet, which isn't very good. But most decks, this is an electromagnet, and this is absolutely fine for doing any erasing. You don't need to bulk erase a tape first, unless you can't be bothered letting it run till the end of the tape after you finish recording on it. These will perfectly fine wipe away anything that was on the tape before you record on it, so don't worry about it. Naturally, you're not going to find these in Walkmans unless they're recording Walkmans, because they don't record, they don't need this head. The second head is the record play head. And then these two guys are very important, the capstan and the pinch roller. Now, I was talking about the take-up reels saying they don't move the tape. They don't. When you play and record, it is the capstan which moves the tape in conjunction with the pinch roller. Basically, the tape sits between the capstan and the pinch roller. The capstan spins. It is wider than the tape, as is the pinch roller. The pinch roller's rubber. They have friction, and by doing that between them, they move the tape. When you regulate the speed of a tape, you're regulating the speed of a capstan. And these two are very important to keep clean. You show me a tape that's been chewed up in a tape deck, I'll show you a tape deck that somebody's never bothered cleaning the capstan of the pinch roller. You've got to think, all this material goes over it, some may remain there, some may stick, builds up over time, it gets sticky, and that's when you get tape snarling up. So if you keep them clean, you're not going to have any tapes being eaten by the machine. It's as simple as that. And this is the way that the tape path moves. It comes down from the feeder hub, so to speak, the one which has the most tape on it. It passes across the erase head here. It passes across the record play head. Either it has data written to it, signal written to it, or read from it. And all of it is regulated by being sandwiched between the capstan and the pinch roller, and then is fed back up here onto the take-up reel. So here, as we can see, we have the tape path. It goes down here, goes through this little reel in the cassette. It's fed along across the erase head. That's only going to be popped up if you're actually recording. If not, it's down below so as not to erase the tape. It goes over the record play head, and as you can see, this little felt pad here on the spring. This is what deteriorates in some cassettes like old Memorexes, and people say, oh, I can't hear anything anymore. Yeah, it's because the sandwich isn't happening. As you can see, the tape gets sandwiched between the tape head and this. The tape head pushes up on this to actually give good contact between the tape and the tape heads, and the capstan and the pinch roller here put the tape between them, regulate the speed. It goes up past this little roller and up to the take-up reel, and that is how a tape actually moves through a cassette head mechanism. But this is for a two-head mechanism. Now, if we look at this, this is a three-head mechanism, and there are some subtle changes which are important. We've got the take-up reels again, they are as they are. But now we've also got a capstan and pinch roller here. Now, don't get confused with auto-reverse decks, because auto-reverse decks also have two sets of capstans and two sets of pinch rollers. The main difference is, though, is that only one of them are working at any one time, i.e. if you're playing in one direction, one set are working, you auto-reverse the other set work. In a closed-loop dual capstan setup like this, they both work in the same direction at the same time. So what it means is basically the tape comes down and goes through here first, where the first capstan and pinch roller are already spinning. It goes across the erase head again to wipe it if you're recording. But the big difference is here. We have a record head and a play head. So that's where the three heads come from. And the record head and the play head are separate. It then passes over to the other capstan and the pinch roller where it's sandwiched. And basically between the two capstans, two pinch rollers, it's more taut and there's more regulation of the speed. Rather than just one dragging the tape, you've got two dragging the tape, and it gives more stability, so you get less what's called wow and flutter. And wow and flutter is where the tape goes up and down in speed, and you can hear it slightly changing. It sounds a bit warbly. But essentially, you record the audio here on the record head, and then you can play it straight away almost on the playhead. So it passes over the record head where the signal's written, and then it's read almost simultaneously by the playhead. And this is why when you hit the monitor button on a three-head deck, you get that little sort of blip as it switches to what's being listened to. Is it the source or is it what's passing over the playhead? And that's why you can make adjustments to bias and level on the fly and hear them almost on the fly. And this is why three-head decks are so much easier to get a tape properly dialed in than a two-head deck where you have to record, rewind, listen, record, rewind. You can't compare, but you can compare it directly on a three-head deck. So what is bias? I like this. I didn't write this. This is one that I found on the internet, but it's a great way of saying it. Bias is a special signal that's applied during recording. It's an applied signal. Don't think of it as EQing on a graphic equalizer, turning up the treble, turning up the bass. It needs to be there because, as it said, the first tape recorder simply applied the raw audio signal to the electromagnet in the head. And that's what the head is. It's an electromagnet. This works but produces a lot of distortion on low frequency sounds. A bias signal is a 100 kilohertz signal, so basically we can't hear this signal. It's there, we cannot hear it. That is added to the audio signal. The bias moves the signal being recorded up into the linear portion of the tape's magnetization curve, i.e. the best bit of the tape. This movement means that the tape reproduces the sound recorded on it more faithfully. I couldn't really show you something visualized about this because it's quite complex, but think of it this way. Say you've got a clear plastic tube and a ball in it, right? A plastic ball, and it's at the bottom. And you want the ball to be in the middle, which is a prime place. You put some air at the bottom of the tube and it will blow the ball up to the middle, if you will. You can't see that air because it's invisible, but the effect it has is that the ball gets to the part of the tube that you want it to be in. And that's the same with this bias signal. 100 kilohertz, you can't hear it, but what it does is it makes sure that the audio signal is in the part of the tape that it needs to be in, because all tapes are different. Metal and chrome tapes, pure chromes, have very linear pigments, whereas ferric, and you've got to think type 1 is ferric, and most type 2s, which aren't pure chrome, in fact, ferro cobalt, so they're still ferric, they're not linear. So there is variances between the different tape stock because of the pigmentation. So this is why you need bias. And even though you may not see a bias dial on a deck, bias is always being applied, but it's being applied internally by the deck, by the way it was calibrated at the factory. So what it means is, if you've got a cassette, yeah, and we've got two graphs, we've got negative bias and positive bias. So taking that bias signal away, adding bias signal. You take it away, your high frequencies are going to be boosted. You add the bias, and your low frequencies are going to be boosted at the expense of the high frequencies. So say you get a tape and it's wrong. It's just taking too much bias away. If you look here in this part, you're going to have a very, very trebly signal with very little bass in it. And the plus side, if there's too much bias, you're going to have a lot of bass, but you're going to lose the top end. What you want is where this rectangle is. You want it in the middle. You want it so that the amount of signal being given gives the right amount of negative bias and the right amount of positive. So it's the right amount of signal that gives you a balanced sound. Now, on most tape decks, if you look on the motherboard, you'll see some little caps and they'll say bias on them. This is where they adjust this in the factory. I don't recommend you do that. Leave them as they are unless you've had an expert do it for you. It takes specialized tapes. You need to get into an oscilloscope and know what you're looking for. But this is why 3-head decks are so good, because most, not all, do check, have something like this, where you have a bias pot where you can manually take away and adjust bias, and know that when you set it to the center, it is how the factory required it regardless, but you can adjust it on the fly per tape. So now let's just watch a little bit where I show you the effect of adding and removing bias. So to demonstrate what I mean by bias, I'm going to use this classic Maxell XL2. Now, I'm just going to put this in, and I'm going to show you that this isn't perfectly biased for this deck. If you look, it's not quite there, but this is the whole point. What I'm going to demonstrate to you here is what audible difference the bias makes. So we've just got the tape recording now, and I'm going to play a little tune and you can listen for yourself. Now if you remember, biasing was all about highs and lows. You take away the bias, you add treble at the expense of bass. You add bias, you put bass at the expense of treble. So, as you can see, this now is pretty neutral. This deck is biased for the TDKSA. But listen to the hi-hats and wait for the bass to kick in. Just compared to the source, doesn't sound too different really. Bias is a very subtle thing, but it's important. Now, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to increase bias. And what you'll hear is that the bass will sound more pronounced at the expense of treble in the top end. Let's turn it to full. This has pronounced bass compared to the treble. Listen to the source. Can you hear? The claps at the top are a lot more pronounced than the tape is now. Sounds duller. We dial back the bias, and as you can hear, the top end starts to come back. But if we take too much out, it gets very bright at the expense of bass. Back to the source. Very pronounced treble. When we put it back to the middle, we're going to lose some of that and get some of the bass back. And that, I hope, explained to you a bit of how sonically bias works, how you can actually hear, it's very subtle, but it's there, the difference between when the biasing is right for the tape and when it's wrong for the tape. So the other part of that little picture at the end was there was bias and recording level, and we need to get this differentiated as to what we're talking about. Now, most decks have something like this. on the front. They've got a master level and a balance. Some of them just have a separate left and right master level. But it's knowing what this is that helps you understand it. If you think about it, we've got the source, and the source is usually connected a left and a right to an amplifier, and then the amplifier has a left and a right out that goes straight into the line in of your cassette deck. Now, when that signal gets there and you adjust the master level, what you're adjusting is this. You're adjusting the level which goes from the line in through the deck circuitry to the record head. So say you adjust it to 0 from the line ins at the back of the deck with this master volume level. What's getting to the record head is what you're setting the levels to be by looking at your VU meters. But that is taking something out of the equation which is important. And that's the tape itself. Because not all tape can absorb the signal. You've got to think there's a signal coming from an electromagnet. And as you know, some magnets are stronger than others. What happens is the tape itself, the pigments, some of them may not be able to absorb enough signal. So you might send a 0 decibel signal to it, but it might not be able to absorb all of that and play it back at 0 decibel. It will lose some of the signal. And likewise, we have other tapes that are really, really good coercivity that can take a 0 decibel signal and actually magnify it. And so when you play it back, it's louder than what you actually fed it. So know that this recording level is all to do with line in and not what will actually be played or recorded on the tape itself. And that's why a lot of 3-head decks, not all of them, have this record sensitivity dial, which means that regardless of what's at the record head, through monitoring you can see through the meters whether what's actually hitting the tape and the tape is absorbing enough. And if the tape isn't absorbing enough signal because it's not magnetic enough, then you can increase the record sensitivity to get it to the level so that it matches what is being fed in at the line input and showing on the VU meters. So to demonstrate the leveling, I'm now going to use this SKC CD. Superb cassette, but this is a pure chrome. Very different. So if I just start recording on this, I'm going to switch to the source. Okay, you'd never normally record a pure chrome at this level, but this is peaking at +2, okay? But if I switch now to the tape, actually it's peaking at +4 this, we can see that this is quite considerably quieter. The mol isn't as good on this tape as, well, it's different to the mol on the tape this deck is calibrated for, because the rec sensitivity is in the middle. Like I say, -2 to 0, but the source is 2 to 4. So this is up to around about 4 dB down on the source. And this is where now, if we want it to match, I'm going to turn it down a bit because you don't want to oversaturate the pure chrome. You can see now the source is at -7. And so is the tape, so let's wait for it to kick in a bit. See, the source is at 4 going to 2, so what I'm going to do simply is adjust it so that it matches. So we have the tape now peaking at around 2. And as we can see, the tape now is matching with the source because we've increased the record sensitivity, and that's how that works. So I hope that was useful for you. So what we saw there is that biasing and leveling is important in trying to get what you see and what you hear to be a copy on the tape. And the level is all to do with something called the mol. and that is the maximum output level. This is basically, think of it as a sponge. The tape is a sponge. It's how much liquid it can absorb. Some can absorb lots, some don't. For example, you could put a signal in at 0 dB. The tape has a really good mol. It comes out and it plays back at several dB more than what you actually set the master record level to be. For example, look at this. This comes off the back of a Denon HD7. And it says here that at 0 dB, which is a reference level, the mol is plus 5.5. So if this deck is biased correctly for this tape, you put a 0 dB signal on it, and it's going to play back at 5.5 decibels. So this is a really spongy tape. This can absorb a lot of signal. And likewise, this goes on hand in hand with something called the sol, which is the saturation output level. This is basically how much signal you can give it until it starts distorting, i.e. you pour so much liquid on the sponge until it starts dripping out because it just can't absorb anymore. So you can put a large signal in some tapes, they don't have the sol, it comes out all distorted at the other side. And again, we go back to the Denon here, where it says the sol here is minus 6.5. That means it can take a lot of signal before it distorts. Likewise, the super ferric tapes like SKCAX and TDKARs, and certainly metal tapes. Metal tapes have the best sol of the lot. That's what we mean when you say you can run it hot. And why would you want to run a tape hot? Because the more signal you put on there, the quieter the amplification needs to be. So if you record a tape very hot, you can turn your amp down a bit. And because you turn the amp down a bit, you're going to hear less hiss. But you're also going to get the actual music at the right level because it was recorded so hot. It's a good way of balancing that out. And that's why you rarely use NR on a tape that you can record really hot. So what does that mean overall? Why is this going to help me make better recordings? Because back in the day, I didn't know this stuff, and now I understand it. And I hope that this has been useful to you. I know there'll be a lot of learned guys who know more than me, and I don't claim to know everything. I'm just explaining it as I understand it, because so many of you have asked for a video like this. So we take a Japanese deck, like this Sony, and we take a Japanese ferrocobalt tape, like a TDK-SA. We also take a 70s European deck like this Dual, and we take a pure chrome Type 2 like this BASF Chrome Maxima. Now, these numbers are made up. They're just made to illustrate something. But what I'm saying is, this SA ideally needs a bias signal of +5 and level of -5. What this means is that this tape is naturally bright, and it also has a good mol, so it doesn't need quite as much signal on it. And the Japanese calibrated the decks to the most popular tapes, because obviously you want to be able to have people put a tape in a deck off the get-go, especially if it's a two-head, record and play back on it and say, wow, that sounds amazing, I did good with this deck. You don't want them to put a tape and go, ugh, that sounds like crap, that does. So they biased it to the most popular tapes, and a lot of it was for the SA. Some decks, like Nakamichi's for example, they have this ZX, SX and EX, which is basically Type 1, Type 2 and Type 4, and you can individually bias the deck internally to each different type of tape. But if we look at, say, the German deck, we've got a pure chrome here that maybe needs a bias level of -4, i.e. this needs signal removing because it's a very bassy tape anyway, it needs a top end, but it also doesn't have as good mol, so it needs +5 amplification so that it reflects what's on the master volume. I'm not saying this is the case for the Chrome Maxima. Like I say, these figures are purely made up to demonstrate this. And we've got the deck where its normal setting is to send it at -4 bias +5 level. So we do that, and as I record, the right levels are sent to the tapes. And when we listen to them back, they sound good. So what happens then if you take a deck that isn't properly biased and calibrated for the tape. So we swap and we put the SA and the chrome in each of these decks. Now, as we can see, what the actual cassette needs, the bias and levels still remains the same. But now what is being fed from the decks is different to what the tape needs. And when that happens, you get bad recordings. And this is like me in the day with my black plastic crap decks and boom boxes putting BASF pure chromes in there when they were calibrated for ferrocobalt. It sounded dull and quiet because there's too much bias being given to it and not enough level. And likewise, in the case of the SA here, it's going to sound bright and distorted. There's not enough bias being given to it, and there's too much level. And that is why you need to be able to calibrate your tape deck to the tape you're using in order to make the very best recordings, because not all tapes are the same. They all require different things, and the only way to make sure that it's right is to actually make sure yourself, by calibrating it, that it's correct. I mean, some decks have something like ATC and a Technics where you can bang it in and then it will play some signals and automatically bias to it. So them two head decks, yes, they're okay for recording on, absolutely, if they've got these auto calibration features. They're not foolproof, but I always say, for what they cost now, you can get a nice 3-head deck, and you can be sure, because you can hear it with your own ears, whether you've got the biasing and the level correctly. So thanks for watching. Sorry it's been a bit different from normal, but please like and subscribe, and I'll be back with another video soon. Happy taping. Bye bye.